There was only one decisive game in Shamkir today. Let's take a look at it. Magnus Carlsen with the white pieces playing Shamkir Mamedyarov from Azerbaijan. Interesting that Magnus opened with his d-pawn. Well, he plays almost everything. Knight f3, e4, c4 is very common, but today, well, a mainline d4 opening, it's a Slav. And, well, typically for Magnus, he's not playing one of the absolute sharpest lines. He's playing e3 instead of knight c3 and maybe bishop g5. But he's keeping things very steady with e3. Now, of course, black can play e6 here, but Mamedyarov played g6, which also is a very sound move. And Magnus develops unpretentiously, and both sides castled. So, as usual in Magnus's games, he's not attempting to blow the head off his opponent right at the start of the game, but just bringing his pieces out, and it's all very steady. b6 from Mamedyarov. Of course, as in many d-pawn openings, it's the question of how you develop the bishop on c8 is often a problem for black. If the bishop were to head out in this direction, then you can see that b7 would be a little bit weak. So for that reason, Mamedyarov plays b6, and then the bishop can come to either b7 or perhaps a6 even. Now, this position has been seen in many professional games, going back to the time of Botvinnik and even earlier than that. And white has many possible moves here. The most common are b3 to bring the bishop out to b2 or a3. You can also take on d5, or you can play bishop d2 and rook c1, or b4 has also been played. All these moves are possible and fairly common. But Magnus, after 4 minutes thought, 4 minutes well invested, plays a4. This, out of all the couple of hundred games in this position, this has only been seen on 12 occasions, and only a couple in top level games. Interestingly, Anand played this as white. I wonder whether Magnus actually knew this. It's a tricky little move. Very often when one advances the a-pawn, or a rook's pawn in general, your opponent has already a question to answer. Do you simply allow this pawn to advance again? Do you block it? Or do you perhaps play a6 so that you can answer a5 with b5? So it sets black a tricky strategic question. So typical Magnus, he likes to put these awkward questions to his opponent. And after 8 minutes, Mamedyarov played a5. Well, a very forthright answer. That a-pawn is going no further, and it also means that black can perhaps try to use the b4 square for the knight. But after just a minute's thought, Magnus exchanged on d5, incidentally, I should say that when Anand played this, his opponent took on d5, but I think that immediately gives white a nice central position. So Mamedyarov played in the most principled way, recapturing, and we have now a very symmetrical pawn structure. But Magnus definitely has some advantage here, and it's all to do with his better placed minor pieces. Look at that bishop on g7. It just bites against that pawn on d4. Nothing is going to happen there when white has this solid pawn chain. But if you look at white's bishops, well, this one has a nice diagonal and maybe a nice square. This one also has a lovely diagonal down here. So this is white's advantage in the position. Of course, black could just play knight c6, but no doubt that white is slightly better here. Instead, after 7 minutes thought, Mamedyarov lashed out with knight e4. he clearly didn't want to find himself in a symmetrical position where he's just a bit worse and with no counterplay. But this is a bit dubious. Magnus exchanged and brought the knight back. The problem is that once that pawn disappears from d5, then white is able to use the c4 square for knight or bishop. And it also opens up this diagonal. Now, of course, the pawn is threatened on e4, so the bishop defended, and bishop a3. So white's minor piece is still looking very good. After 12 minutes, Mamedyarov played f5. I think it's almost inevitable that this pawn is going to advance. But as we see very often in the Dutch defence, if black's attack comes to nothing, then this diagonal is of course open and the king is weak, and sometimes the 7th rank as well. Watch out for that one. Rook c1, a very natural move, of course. King popped in the corner, yeah, already feeling a little bit sensitive on that diagonal. And now Magnus thought for 17 minutes over his next move. There are several ways that white could play here. You could just put your bishop on b5, that's a nice square. You could also change the pawn structure. This is not a bad way to play. And white's pieces still look better than black's. But knight c4 came. Okay, let's see what his idea is. Of course, the knight is looking at this key square, so Mamedyarov covered it. Now, white could play more slowly here with queen d2, but instead Carlsen, this is clearly his idea, he played this very quickly. He just piles through the middle of the board. And again, d6, the pawn advanced. I mean, this is such powerful play. He just believes that with these advanced pawns, it looks very impressive, but behind these pawns is a massive hole. It's like a vacuum that will suck white's pieces in. And, well, Magnus's judgment is absolutely correct. Black has huge problems here. For example, if pawn takes, then the knight comes in and, well, it already looks absolutely deadly. Well, black can avoid the loss of material, but that knight could, well, threaten something deadly over here. So Mamedyarov has to play e6, but of course that leaves Magnus with this beautiful passed pawn on d6. Well, okay, what's white's next objective? Well, the next objective is to try to blast lines open on the queen side and try to destroy the blockader. And, well, it's incredible how focused Carlsen is in his plan. So, first of all, lines are opening on the queen side. And again, no messing around. You could play queen d2 here, but a5, he's just going for it straight away. And in this way, he's getting through to black's blockading knight here. The Germans have a very good word for this, zielstrebig. You might say in English, targeted, single-minded, determined. That's a reasonable translation. Zielstrebig. That's Carlsen's play today. Before I should say Mamedyarov exchanged off here, but Mamedyarov could capture a pawn here after these exchanges. But Carlsen would then have the two bishops. Bishop attacking here. I mean, it would be very easy for white to target this pawn and the knight, perhaps with the queen a4 later on. But yeah, just very interesting that Carlsen didn't bother to hang around. He didn't mind giving up a pawn to break through. Anyway, Mamedyarov didn't play like that. And now the queen coming out to a4. So you can see these diagonals now open and the pressure is building. And actually, Mamedyarov crumbled very quickly here. And here's another interesting moment. That queen is of course under attack, and it could go backwards here, but Carlsen kept going forward. I mean, he's like a machine. It's extraordinary. He doesn't mind self-pinning. He's in a pin here, but black can't exploit that, and it would mean that basically this blockader has gone, and white is getting closer to just driving the blockader away. Mamedyarov avoided the exchange, but perhaps this is even worse, and his position is now crumbling. Notice that black's king is becoming more exposed little by little, whereas Carlsen's king absolutely rock solid. Basically, Mamedyarov has not been able to lay a glove on Carlsen in this game. The bishop came back. It was under fire there, and now bishop c3, Carlsen turning towards black's king now, and just getting rid of that knight, which is a blockader here. Knight d7 loses immediately, but black is already lost. And watch what happens to the king. Queen d4, excuse me, queen e5 check. Queen e5 check. And here Mamedyarov resigned. If well, rook f6 or king g8, let's just see this. If king g8, then rook c7 ends the game, followed by a queen g7 mate. I mean, just such a powerful performance from Magnus Carlsen in that game. So after 2 rounds in Shamkir, there are 3 players on 1.5 points. Kramnik, So and Carlsen. 9 rounds. No, excuse me. 9 rounds in total. 7 rounds remaining.